Welcome to the kickoff panel for the inaugural Climate Career Week. I'm Cody Sims, partner at MCJ Collective, and this is a kickoff event to a week of 17 sessions with 40 amazing speakers. And so it's brought to you by Climate Draft, Terra.do, MCJ Collective, and Work on Climate, which are 4 organizations that are all working together to help folks learn about, transition into, find their path in the world of working on solutions to climate change, mitigating the worst effects of climate change. This session today features 3 leading executives working in climate today, 2 investors and 1 founder, startup founder. And what's amazing about today's session is the 3 folks that we're going to be chatting with all have long tenured careers operating in tech unrelated to climate and have made the jump over to focusing and working in climate today. Before we dive in with everybody, a few housekeeping things. First of all, if you haven't, make sure you've checked out climatecareerweek.org. That's the website for this week's slate of events. On there, you'll find all of the different sessions that are going on. There are, in addition, 15 different local community meetups around the world that are happening for people to get to know each other in your local community and build network and learn from each other. There are also one-on-one climate career office hours that are happening on Friday, so you can sign up there to meet other folks and get some coaching on your climate path, in addition to meeting potential interesting companies. There's a job board, and there's a whole set of resources on how to transition into climate. My personal intro, and then we're going to not hear a whole bunch from me today. Hopefully we'll hear a lot from these 3 folks here joining us. But I'm, like I said, Cody Sims. I'm a partner at MCJ Collective. I'm also the co-host of the My Climate Journey podcast. I'm a co-founder of Climate Changemakers, which is a political action organization focused on pushing policy change in climate. I helped Jonathan and the team at Climate Draft in the early days of getting going there. I'm a Terra.do alum, and I'm a member of the Work on Climate group. So I think I'm batting across the slate of groups here, which is just to show how much collaboration there is in this climate space today. So, you being here is sort of you plugging into the different organizations that are all working together very collaboratively to help. A little about MCJ. MCJ powers collective innovation for climate solutions by breaking down silos and unleashing problem-solving capacity. We do that really because we believe that climate change requires working together like never before, because systems problems need interdisciplinary points of view. And we do that in 3 sort of key ways that all engage together. There's content side, which is the My Climate Journey podcast, our newsletter, et cetera. Please subscribe and listen to those if you don't. There is the MCJ member community, which is one of the resources that we've talked about, which is a group of a few thousand members working together to work on climate solutions. And then there's capital. We run a venture capital firm that's now invested in close to 80 individual climate tech startups. So have worked across a lot of the solutions in the climate tech space. But enough about me. Let's dive in and meet Katie, meet Christian, and meet Raj. Katie, do you want to give, each of you just give like a 30-second intro of what you do now? We're going to focus on your path up to now over a lot of the conversation, but each of you just introduce what you do now. Katie, why don't you take it away to start?
All right. Thanks, Cody. Thanks for also calling us old by our long careers. Also amazing. There are 500 people here. So this is super encouraging and inspiring. So I'm Katie Stanton. I'm the founder and GP of Moxie Ventures, which is an early stage venture fund. We're generalist investors. We invest in software solutions to hard problems that help a lot of people. But I would say the one category that keeps us most active and excited is in climate. I have zero experience in climate, so I welcome all other people feeling imposter syndrome, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. We're deploying out of our second fund, which is an $85 million fund. I'm based in Boulder, Colorado, at the base of the Rockies, but had been in California for the past 20 or so years. My background has been as an operator. I was at Yahoo, Google, Twitter, rest in peace, and Color, and different operating roles. And the last thing I'll say, the best thing about being in climate tech right now is something that Cody had mentioned. It's just so collaborative, and it's just really fucking important. So I hope you all do more of it.
Thank you, Katie. How about you, Christian?
Yeah, so excited to have the whole group here. So my name's Christian. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of a company called Watershed. So Watershed works with large companies to measure and reduce their carbon emissions. So we have this interesting vantage point on climate, getting to see both the team that we are seeing assembled directly in the space, and that is awesome. But then we also get this vantage point into so many of the world's largest companies and see the teams in-house that are assembling around those companies' climate priorities in a way that's super exciting for us. So that's what I'm up to.
Fantastic. Sorry, I couldn't find the mute button. Raj, how about you?
Yes, hi, it's great to be here. And as Katie said, it's just fantastic. We have so many people interested in climate. My current role is founder and managing partner at Climactic, which is a climate tech early stage VC fund. Our focus is on the 5,000 enterprises that have made a net zero pledge, which is now 90% of worldwide GDP. How do we get them there faster? Folks like Christian are helping out too, and it's super awesome. And I'm also focused on mobility, given some of my background.
Awesome. Thanks, Raj. And just a brief pause to mention, please weigh in with questions in the Q&A button of Zoom here. We will have time for audience questions as we continue on with the conversation. And you can also upvote there. So if you see something that someone wrote that you like, just give it a quick upvote. So what I want to start with, again, this is all about climate careers and transitioning into climate. And I think what's important about all three of you is that you have long operating, not old, Katie, long and tenured operating backgrounds, working, in tech before you made the leap into climate. And so just to establish that, Katie, you mentioned a little bit some of your background, but why don't each of you talk about the work that you did unrelated to climate that helped you establish your careers in tech? And then we'll kind of get to how that then turned into you, sort of discovering climate pathways to leverage those skills. But I just want to start by having each of you kind of, establish what it is you did to build your own operating experience. Katie, feel free to go first.
Great. Well, I'd say maybe two different things played a big role professionally, and then one personally. Professionally, I was a product manager at Yahoo and Google, and really at Google, it was about how do you build great things that matter? And Google did such a good job, I think, of those early years of building a product organization that was interdisciplinary, working with lots of different functions and building things that could really scale. And I was also very fortunate at that time. There was the cohort there of like Elad Gil and Othman Laraki and Susan Wojcicki and Brett Taylor and all these amazing product people today are all leading organizations. And just knowing what great looks like, I think is really important in venture. The second professional thing was at Twitter, and my role there was helping Twitter scale outside the United States in terms of partnerships and employees and revenue, and just understanding the tricks and the challenges and the opportunities of various markets and how do you prioritize those markets. That was really important. And then I think the third thing, which was really personal, having lived in California for most of my life and just seeing, we could see firsthand the effects of climate change and lack of water and increase in fires. And during COVID, just thinking, well, I think we need to spread out a little bit. And I have some family in Colorado and thought maybe it'd be easier in Colorado, just getting away from climate change just a little bit. And a year ago, maybe a month ago or so, December of last year, I had to evacuate my house because there was a wildfire in Colorado in December. Like, we cannot run away from climate change, and we have to all be part of the solution. So I think those three things in various different ways all contributed to what I think will be helpful to me going forward with, climate tech investing.
So Katie, I heard, just as a point of emphasis for folks, I heard, really focusing earlier in your career on network and, trying to, regardless of whether you're working on climate, working with people that are incredibly impressive and well skilled that you believe will move into other parts of, the world that you want to be in over time. And, your ability to continue to leverage that network sounds like has been very helpful for you. And then also, you said product, right? So really focusing on the core of why something matters from a functionality or product perspective sounds like big takeaways for you earlier in your career that have really helped you anchor you.
Yeah, 100%. You said it much better than me, actually. So thanks.
No, but thanks for sharing the nuggets. Christian, how about you? I mean, I think you have had a shorter career so far than Katie and Raj. But
I don't know. I think I have the most gray hair on this Zoom call.
you have more hair than me, though. But very impactful. So maybe explain sort of for you what your journey was like at Stripe and what how you we'll not get into the how you transitioned part of it yet, but kind of what skills did you build up at Stripe that ultimately helped you as you transitioned?
Yeah, I mean, I think the message I'd want to emphasize here is one of accessibility to climate work, right? So, I mean, so Stripe, fantastic company. It's not, and certainly for most of the time I was there, not a company that at that time worked on climate projects, right? So myself and my two co-founders all come from Stripe, and I think we built a lot of thoughts around how to scale a product to businesses and how to assemble a world-class engineering team and how to be sort of customer and product obsessed in figuring out what are the value drivers for a company of the work that they need to do. And I mean, all that stuff is awesome, but I'm pretty sure anybody on this Zoom call could list out sort of as related a set of bullet points to climate. And probably like a lot of people here, I'd been personally passionate about climate for a long time. My dad's a professional environmentalist, and it had been something kind of in the water, literally and figuratively, for us growing up. And finding a way to sort of bridge that, plus the stuff that we as a founding team had learned into working on climate at scale was, I think, very replicable. And I think something that the world's very hungry for right now. And I think there's room for at least everybody on this Zoom call to do exactly that.
Yep. So I'm hearing, focused on working at scale and learning how to, scale out a technology. If we're going to work on climate change, these problems have to scale, for the most part, have to be able to solve these these whatever climate problem you're solving, you have to be able to be ready to solve it at scale.
Yeah, exactly. And there's kind of no problem of greater scale right now, I would say, than climate, where both as a problem, but also in terms of if we think about solving it, what is needed is an economic transformation that, if successful, will be the largest, I think, in the history of the world's economy. That is, I think, what makes it exciting to work on from a startup perspective, where we could probably all list, causes that are really, really important to us, where there is not necessarily that same intersection with a scaled business. Yep. And I think climate is really interesting because the nature of what needs to happen is this economic transformation.
Yeah.
Where then there's a lot of potential. Yeah.
And Christian, we are going to get into that for sure. And I'm glad you're emphasizing it right at the start of the conversation, which is, one of the biggest misconceptions I think I hear when people think about moving into climate is, I can't make any money doing this, right? It's sort of I would be doing it for the good of the world and the good of my heart, but it's not a professional sort of career path to support my family and all of that. And I think that is personally, I think that is not only a false assumption, but if all of these technologies are successful, this is rewiring the global economy, which has huge financial implications. We'll get to that for sure, but I'm glad you brought it up. Raj, how about you? Talk about your operating background, which you've had all sorts of different experiences, from founding companies to operating large growth companies. Explain about how that sort of help prepare you for the climate work that you do today?
Sure. I'd say in summary, I'm old. That's the most important takeaway. 29 years of general tech experience. So I started when I was 3 years old. So I would say, first of all, you absolutely don't need to be a climate tech expert to jump into climate tech because it just started anyway. So we're all experts. We can be preordained experts in doing it. You don't need to be old, but I am. So let's ignore that for a second. I started out in general tech, really at when the internet was starting to happen commercially. And I jumped back and forth because of ADD, maybe between, I started out at Excited, actually in a telecom company at Bell Atlantic when the internet was just happening, then Excited Home, a broadband provider doing product. And then I started a company called Snapfish and Online Photos. And the day after I started, noticed there were 100 other companies that started there too. And then after that, joined Mayfield. I was a venture capitalist there because the first time we sold Snapfish, we lost money. So I lost a lot of money for Mayfield. So they hired me as a partner. Then we bought it back and sold it again later, but they didn't make much money off of it. So somehow they hired me as a partner. And that's where I'll get later into kind of what happened with climate, but really loved network effects in marketplaces. And I also saw the scaling of enterprise and how you can build a really world-class company. Was fortunate enough to invest in Lyft as a Series A lead. But I got the itch again and I started a fitness marketplace, which was called FitMob, which now got gobbled by ClassPass, which got gobbled by MindBody. And that exists. And then I joined Lyft, primarily for climate, but I'll talk about that later, as the chief strategy officer. And there, really, my job was to focus on the future. John and Logan were focused on how do we fight a really brutal war with Uber, which is not fun. I focused on how do we electrify, make self-driving and shared fleet of the future for Lyft. So I learned a little bit about electrification, which was exciting. So the bottom line is all of these skills, they seem quite random. But as I'm helping companies in climate tech, the thread that I've noticed is that there are great entrepreneurs with great ideas, some of them very technical, some of them that are just nuts and bolts software, which is necessary, data necessary. What they need help is commercializing and scaling. And that speed at which happened in the internet is the speed at which we need to move right now, because we have about 5 years to make a difference in early stage investing to impact the 2050 net zero goal. So like this is a call to arms right now for people that understand commercialization and scaling and have software, data, hardware experience. We need it. It's not about what you know in climate. It's about all those other things.
So Raj, one of the big things I took away from you just describing, your path, you said, lots of varied experiences. I heard someone who is willing to learn on the job, someone who's willing to feel like I can harness my MVP of skills in whatever area and use those to complement learning a new skill on the next job I'm going to take. And it reminds me when I was first jumping into climate work myself only a few years ago, right? In 2020, my now co-founder of Climate Changemakers, Eliza Nimzer, said to me, go on your climate journey, spend a few months, figure your stuff out and jump in, and you got to move fast. And I guess the question I would ask, for each of you is, how do you get comfortable learning on the job while also making sure you're not totally full of it when you're taking on very important work here? What's the boundary of how much you need to know to actually, be effective, and how much you can sort of learn as you go? And so maybe I'll start, Christian, with you, given that you're, the one operating a business in this space. You've had to fill some gaps as you've gone too. But I'm curious how you've managed that.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. And I think most important thought would be, it is an extremely welcoming space where I think all of us on this Zoom call, I think everyone involved with Climate Draft, I think everyone involved with MCJ and so on would be very eager to help people strike that balance of learning as they go. but not needing to wait. Like we benefited from that enormously as Watershed has been scaling. We spent probably 6 to 12 months before the company launched, just like learning from others in the climate space in a way that amazed me, right? Until we took a swing at that, I would not have expected, the such intensely busy people working on such an intensely demanding mission to have so much time to bring others into the space. And I think it turns out to be true. And I think it's something that's very distinctive about climate. So I would say the answer is kind of you have to do both, right? You kind of have to get working on it quickly, and you have to backfill decades of knowledge about the problem and potential solutions and so on. And it's challenging to both at the same time, but the space is so welcoming that I think it makes a challenging thing very, very possible. And I would say that everyone's extremely welcoming and free with their time, and even more so when they recognize kind of real commitment to work on the space. So I think, ironically, I think we've probably all met folks that are like, I'm going to learn a lot and then maybe commit to working on it. And I think that just makes the learning phase so much slower, probably both for personal reasons, but also because for everyone in this space, there's just so much enthusiasm every time someone new commits to working on it. You can get a real crash course.
Yeah, and Raj, you mentioned leaning into your operating experience as something that the climate tech space generally just needs help with, like thinking about, bringing scale experience or whatnot. What advice do you have for folks on how to leverage their existing skill sets when thinking about applying them to climate, particularly, I think, from a climate tech perspective? If you've had 5 years, 8 years experience at Google or Meta or Uber or whatever, and now you're thinking about moving into climate, what do you recommend people do to leverage the skills they have? And what skills do they maybe have that they don't even recognize that they have yet when moving into climate?
Yeah, that last one's a really interesting one. So when I look at climate tech, we've kind of looked at, there's about 77 different subsectors of climate tech now. It's extremely broad. The one industry that's going to be absolutely changed, just like if you think about digitization, the big industry that was changed was media, but everything was impacted by the digitization trend. And by the way, that's how venture made money. Now we're in decarbonization. The one industry that's going to be absolutely changed by it is energy, but it impacts everything. So I think people assume that they need to be an energy expert to get into climate, but when in fact it's so much more of a broader problem than just energy. I would say that this is all about systems level thinking. And I think the best example of that, whether you like him or not, is Elon, where he didn't really build cars before, but he was a systems level thinker, and he has a famous approach that he took in, which is constantly getting to first order principles. Why? And so what I would suggest is look at all those different sectors that are out there. What are you really fascinated about if you know nothing about it? Try to dig into it from a first order principle perspective and see if you're still in brain fog or not. So I'll give you a negative example. I was looking at batteries, and I looked at it with someone who ran batteries at Tesla, who left Tesla. And I was like, okay, I should know a thing or two about this. I was an engineering background. The more I looked at it, the more I had brain fog. Like, okay. And I couldn't necessarily help figure out which chemistry is going to make it or which software package. So then I shifted focus into other areas, for example, in software and data, and said, oh, I get this and how it connects into utilities, and ended up going deeper in that because it clicked for me as I asked more first order principle questions. So I think it's spend some time exploring, go a little bit deep and see if your comfort level makes it or not. But at the end of the day, this is all about systems.
And thanks, Raj. Super helpful framing. And Katie, I want to go back to you saying leveraging network was an incredibly a good skill set you think you built up during your sort of earlier career operating in tech. How have you leveraged that network yourself as you've been transitioning to learn more about climate?
Yeah, when I started, it was funny because I started as a VC about 4 years ago, and I had so much imposter syndrome being a VC because I'd never been one. And then I realized everyone's kind of figuring it out. I'm not alone. And then I had that same kind of feeling with climate that, well, who do I think I am? First as a VC, now a climate VC. And one of the first things I did was tapped into my network and talked to you, Cody, talked to Saka at Lower Carbon, and Jason Jacobs, and then to Anshuman at Terra.do. And I was like, Anshuman, like, I feel like I'm at this 8th grade level of climate understanding. How do you graduate me to maybe 12th grade? And realizing though that I wasn't alone, there were a lot of really well-intentioned investors, either angels or even operators, I want to learn more. And so we put together this climate camp and just kind of level setting and understanding this vast landscape of climate tech. And Raj is right. There's so many, like 77 different micro pieces of it. And it's vast and it's huge. There's fusion and hydrogen and energy and data science, like all this stuff. And it is overwhelming. But I think just level setting, try to get as wide of an understanding of what is possible. And then also to Raj's point, like understanding, where do you have passions? Where do you have understanding? Where do you have a network that can make you better? And for us, where we've been able to really fine tune where we stand with climate tech investing, it is playing our strengths, which is in software. So we look and invest in only software solutions within climate tech. So one example is Overstory, an investment that we made based in Amsterdam. Awesome team, AI for vegetation management, selling into utilities and ultimately insurance companies, helping them understand which of their assets are more prone to drought risk or fire risk, what have you. Global team, systems thinkers, like really thoughtful. And it's a place where we feel like we can make a positive impact. So it is a journey. You have to start where you are and do what you can. But the most important thing is to just get started and to do it.
And I'm curious, where do you feel like you still have imposter syndrome today? That's a broad question for anyone who any one of the three of you who wants to answer. But like when you are there situations you're in today where you're like, oh my gosh, like I should not be called upon as being the expert in this, or I'm really struggling to figure out how to deal with this space. Raj, you gave maybe a good example there with battery chemistry as an example. But I'm curious, how you all navigate those scenarios when you find yourselves in them.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. Battery was one example. In general, like new materials, new technologies that have some sort of real big science risk are challenging. And I find myself imposter syndrome because I don't know as nearly as much. And the question in all this is, do you know what you don't know? And when you don't know what you don't know, you're like, uh-oh, that gets, even more imposter syndrome that comes up. The way that I've jumped into these things is really by finding the experts that are in it and using that systems level thinking around, okay, so what are the assumptions going into this? How else can it be used? What are the alternatives in doing it? But really, the truth is, it's a big learning curve every time we look at something new. Even if I take software and I'm looking at maritime right now, which is a really inefficient space with transportation and emissions, and I don't know anything about the maritime industry. So then you have to figure out, who are the people that I can get up to speed? What are the things I can read to get up to speed most, and hope that you don't make too many mistakes?
I'll give the founder version of this, which is, and I don't know how climate specific it is, but I think as a founder, you're always hyper conscious of the way that your company and your product could be doing even better for the customers, right? So I think a huge piece of what's helped Watershed grow has been that there are already inside of essentially every large company, many people thinking and actively working on that company's carbon emissions and carbon reduction. Extremely exciting, right? That's like great for the world and also great for building a startup to serve those people. And at the same time, right, it means you're kind of playing for an expert audience. You're trying to build tools for experts. You're trying to bring data to expert decision-making. And you hit what any startup hits, which is being so conscious of, okay, there's some ways in which we're hopefully helping the customer. Awesome. But then there's all of these other ways where we could be doing better or different or more or faster for the customer. And that is an everyday feeling, absolutely every day.
Fantastic. Oh,
I
go
would
ahead,
just
Katie.
add
Yeah.
to like, just embrace the learning curve. It is a privilege to be in this business where you're constantly learning. And I've also found that the founders that we talk to, whether it's in like green cement or ag tech or electrification, whatever it is, they appreciate our dumb questions. And we always come out of each of those conversations better. And if we're not the right investor, it's been so awesome to know all of you and the many other investors out there who are like, they may be. And so let's keep like pushing the industry forward and faster because we don't have a lot of time to waste.
So I know we have a lot of folks joining today who have maybe had a career in big tech and are saying, hey, next thing I want to go figure out is, if and how I can move into applying my experience in climate. And, for folks like that, it's obvious, if you're a software engineer, you've got software engineering skills. If you're a product manager, you've got product management skills. If you're in sales, you got sales skills. But what skills do you see people with big tech having that they maybe don't even recognize they have, that can be applied to climate tech companies? I'll throw out one example I've seen, which is, if you've worked in big tech for multiple years, you've probably gone through a performance review cycle, or how to hire at scale, or kind of some of these just basically intangible skills. I'm curious for any of you in, Raj and Katie in your portfolios, Christian in your own company, where have you seen people who have those big tech backgrounds come in and be able to hit the ground running? And where have you seen, people also need to kind of slow down in order to speed up?
Let's see, so I can jump in. I would say one of the biggest areas, since we deal a lot with enterprises, is enterprise sales. Usually, the entrepreneur is coming in with a really keen insight around how they can help an enterprise in whatever their climate problem is. But selling is absolutely transferable, whether you're selling SAP or some sort of application to something around climate, and who are the right people to talk to. And the second piece of that related is rapid scaling up of teams to do that. Hiring, recruiting, and managing, those skills are clearly transferable.
One of the other areas is in marketing. One of the challenges I felt that a lot of climate tech companies have had is just storytelling. They get caught up in the science of things, and for both consumers and potential buyers and even employees are like, I don't get it, and they may be scared to buy it. And so one of the emerging things, there's one organization called the Regenerates, a bunch of women who are all PMMs at great companies and helping climate tech companies tell their story. So I think there's a huge opportunity for any of you who have been in sales and marketing to be able to transfer those skills and really, better understand the customer and communicate to those customers.
I'll just echo that, which is that I think it's the sort of the customer obsession lens. I think the role that somebody transitioning, in your example from big tech, can maybe help fill is a role of speed and helping accelerate bringing to market the right climate technology or climate solutions. And if the goal is to bring something to market really, really fast, then it depends, I think, on what any other tech startup is going to depend on, which is a laser clear understanding of who is that initial customer, what is the need that they have to solve for. And as Katie said, I think a challenge in climate can be how that the space is so terrifically broad and the technology landscape is so terrifically broad, and it's easy for a climate venture to see, I think it's easy for any climate venture to see a long-term, like 10, 20, 40-year horizon for what role that technology or that approach could play in the long arc of decarbonization. And I think what many climate ventures benefit from is, okay, well, what's the next 6 months? What's the next 12 months? Like, what's the path to bringing this to market through pockets of really urgent, really, really urgent customer need?
So I love that all three of you talked in some way, shape, or form about customer centricity and customer focus, right? And in my mind, I think, oh, I know we're focusing on climate tech. I'm actually going to shift that in just a second. But, in a climate tech company, you've got, these highly technical founders who maybe worked at a, university research lab or whatnot, and like know how to build the technology that's going to change the world, but don't know how to get people to buy it, don't know how to talk about it, don't know how to get customers engaged with it. And I'm hearing from each of you, whether it's on the marketing side, the sales side, the customer engagement side, there are skills there that anyone who's worked in tech for the most part has, whether you're in software engineering or whether you're in, marketing and sales, like you've learned how to build something that lots of people use. And that is an intangible skill set, or it could be a very tangible skill set, but that's a skill set that you can bring to bear that may be new for these organizations in terms of, leveraging what you've figured out how to do, even if it's, knowing if you're building software that you need to understand the privacy rules of that software, or you need to understand just these sort of intangible nature that your customers are going to care about. So on this note, the fact that there are customers on the other end, we focused much of the conversation thus far on the startup side. Christian, you sell to big companies who have large that are large multinational companies that are buying your software, and they have employees that care about climate. What are you seeing from big enterprise today in terms of changing skill sets that they need in their organizations?
So the backdrop to this is the thing that you alluded to earlier, Cody, which is that I think large companies realize that there is so much work at the intersection of decarbonization on the one hand and the economic goals of the company at the other. And I think that was substantially less true 20, 30, 40 years ago. And now the progress of hard tech in the climate space, be it in energy, agriculture, and industrials, manufacturing, means that we're now in this era where I think large companies see really keenly the sort of potential payoff of climate investments for the business. And on the flip side, the transition and physical risk that a company's sort of failing to transition. So what that's meant is probably one of the most encouraging things that we've seen in the climate space in our time in business has been that in many of large companies, you get the ambitious up and comers focus somehow on that company's climate work, right? And that's amazing. I think startups in the climate space seek to serve those audiences, and I think it's been an outlet for many people, including maybe many people on this call, to get into climate work without even needing to leave the sort of organization they love, but in a way that's kind of tied to that company's business goals. This has been an acceleration over the past few years, right? When Watershed started 3 years ago, I think what I just described was true of some fraction of companies, maybe particularly ambitious, particularly forward-thinking ones. And I think it has gone mainstream much faster than I expected or we expected over the past few years. The strength of the business case and the degree of seriousness behind climate work in these large companies. And that is awesome because at the end of the day, it's the economy that needs to decarbonize, which means it's the large companies that need to decarbonize.
So Christian, what I'm hearing you say is, a decade ago, the kind of the innovation departments and the kind of cutting edge departments in these big companies, they were maybe focused on cloud or mobile or digitization or whatnot. And today, those same departments are focused on decarbonization, sustainability, sort of pushing the envelope of the organization from that perspective. Is that correct?
I think a decade ago, decarbonization was not in the money for most companies, right? Which presented a stark trade-off. I mean, at the level of the company, and I mean, also even at the level of the global economy, like what has been the tension of this space for decades, right? Is do we suffer the catastrophe of climate change, or do we suffer the pains of stalled economic growth, of stalled industrialization, of stalled sort of energy abundance? Like that has been this sort of crux tension, which is felt at a society level and certainly felt at a company level as well. And I think very rapidly over probably the past 10 years, I think most large companies have transitioned out of feeling that tension as being the blocker on their climate work, instead feeling like decarbonization is in the money for the business. And now now the blockers are more mundane, but extremely important around like skill and access to technology and speed of deployment and so on.
And Katie or Raj, I'm curious how you're seeing a balance for the portfolio companies you work with that are engaging in sales or marketing with large enterprises, large organizations, how you're seeing them balance investment in operational decarbonization relative to investments in risk management, securing sort of continued access to the resources they need to continue to operate their businesses as they operate them today.
Do you want to go first, Raj?
Sure, go for it.
Okay, okay. I mean, one interesting trend, I've been seeing when I was at Google early on, I remember we had a mobile team, and that team was to work on taking any new product to be mobile. And at Twitter, we had an international team, which was how do we, grow the business internationally? And then you see a wide variety of companies who all did the same thing, even with like a DEI team and a ESG team. And I think that those models are just old. Like it can't be one person's responsibility to make sure the company is environmentally sound. It can't be one person's responsibility to make sure that you have a diverse employee base and leadership. It is everybody's responsibility. Like it has to be entwined in the fabric of these companies as they grow if they're going to achieve any of their, profitability goals, their decarbonizing goals, whatever they may be. So it really has to be woven into the fabric of these companies. So we're starting to see those trends. I think it's still very early with ESG. I actually want most ESG teams to go away, and I want it to be like really the responsibility. Sorry, sorry, Christian, but like it has to be the CEOs and the executive teams need to see that this is going to be like an important business to to stay in business for the long term. So just one of the observations I've seen over the years.
Katie, so I think what's interesting there is the point you're getting at. We've talked about transitioning into startups. We've talked about what skills do big companies need if you want to transition into climate work at a big company. But I'm also hearing you say there's going to be opportunity to make any job a climate job. Take your current job and put a climate lens against it and see what happens.
Every company is a tech company. It's not just companies that are born in Silicon Valley. Like they're all becoming tech companies, and they should all become some kind of climate company too.
Yeah. How about you, Raj?
Yeah, I would say I think they both have nailed it. The thing I would add there is that one thing you can look for if you're thinking about joining a large company is have they made the transition that not just the sustainability department, but other departments have climate goals. Because if it's only sitting in a sustainability department, which barely has any budget, it's not going to probably go anywhere. And we're certainly seeing that happen now, where you ask them like about what their OKRs are outside of sustainability. And then I would say, and similar to what Katie was saying, is that remember in digitization, there was a chief digital officer of everything, and now there's really not a chief digital officer because everything's digital. So like same thing, that'll be like when the real watershed moment, no pun intended, happens, is when there's no more of a sustainability department, as Katie said. One thing I want to mention about because it's coming up in the questions I'm seeing too, is job security. And, we've been talking to a lot of large companies around this, and what they'll say publicly versus what they'll do is different right now in 2023 because of what we're seeing with a recession and people missing their numbers. And so try to find the sweet spot where there's business value, not just carbon reduction. I'll give you one example of this, which is that for transportation moving into an EV fleet, it reduces the operating expenses significantly, and it's a win in terms of zero emissions. So trying to find those dual things are going to be the ones that are probably going to make it versus the ones that'll be pushed off a bit. And that's the challenge in having a 2050 goal, is everyone's like, okay, well, 2023, I'll just kind of push that out because we'll take care of it later. And I think that's something that you should worry about in 2023.
Super interesting feedback, Raj. I'm starting to kind of look through the Q&A here. We've got a ton of questions that are coming through. And one that I want to push on, because we've talked so much about tech. How do you recommend folks who work in climate today or in ESG or sustainability, but don't have a tech focus to what they do? Maybe they work at an NGO. Maybe they work, for ESG in a financial analyst, but they want to move into tech. What recommendations do any of you have for people who are kind of looking to make that leap into climate tech with a climate background, but no tech experience?
Maybe a couple ideas, starting with curiosity, just be as curious as possible, be as open-minded as possible, be humble. You might be VP of blah de blah at some company, and don't worry about the title, just get into the organization that you are most excited about. And so much of any job is about the people that you're working with and the mission, but keep networking, throw yourself out there. The dream job is never going to come to you. No one's going to knock on your door and be like, hey, guess what, Raj? I've got the best job in the whole wide world for you. Like, you have to work for it. You have to sweat for it. You have to grovel a bit. So just keep networking, and, me speaking for all of us, just like reach out to all of us. We're happy to help. And, My Climate Journey and My Climate Draft or Climate Draft and Terra.do, like all these great organizations are there to help support you. So never before have we had so many organizations and people willing to help and bring you on board. So put yourself out there.
If there's one thing I'd add to that, it's that deep climate expertise is an extraordinarily rare skill set in the world right now. I think roughly every watershed customer plus watershed itself is actively hiring for that expertise right now. I think if somebody has built that up over the course of their career, but hasn't sampled the hiring market in a little while, I think they would probably find it very different from a few years ago in terms of just how in demand climate expertise is right now. So if someone's trying to do the particular transition you're describing of getting from sort of climate into climate tech, I think there's thousands of climate tech companies, ourselves included, who would be thrilled to sort of bring that skill on board. And then I think you kind of say the same for any, if you got that climate skill, the kind of transition you want, there's going to be some company kind of at the intersection that's really hungry for that climate skill set.
So we've talked about, being okay, being comfortable learning on the job, being sort of entrepreneurial, jumping in head first. Are there certain functions in these climate tech companies where you probably can't learn on the job, right? Like, even in tech, you could kind of learn you can't learn low-level coding on the job, but you can learn basics of software engineer as you go, and like a lot of self-taught, really great software engineers out there. Where in climate are there limitations to that? I'll throw out a few. If you're working at wanting to go work at a nuclear fusion company and you're actually wanting to split atoms yourself, you probably need some physics background, or merge atoms, I guess, if you're in fusion. You probably need a physics background to some extent. But, that's an obvious example. But, I'm sure there are a few others that folks have come across where you see roles that, there is going to require some specialty to them.
I think various sort of examples of deep technical expertise or deep science expertise are that. And then I think on the other end of the spectrum in a climate tech company, there's probably roles that it's really just deep operating expertise, right? There's, many roles in a sales team are going to be open to an experienced seller, right? And but then there's other roles within the company, maybe specifically designed to help someone who's interested in kind of getting into a sales team, but is not yet an experienced enterprise seller, get their feet under them, sort of the SDR roles in that particular example. So I think there's probably, if you can get the mesh of all the roles in a company, I think any sort of coveted role that requires years of deep expertise to do probably has some adjacent roles that are maybe a bit supporting or kind of the junior variant that I think probably give a chance to kind of angle in towards that coveted role. So I think it would be what's the most coveted one? And then sort of look one step outward
Yeah.
in the company around who works most closely with that person without needing the same 20 years of academic pedigree.
Great. So, I just wanted to make sure we covered that, because I think, it probably isn't fair to say every job can be learned on the job. There are some that are going to be very specialty, but I think there are more than people probably recognize that are roles where your existing experience can translate in some way, shape, or form. So the next question I want to ask is, we're in a world where unfortunately quite a few people have been impacted by layoffs over the last 6 months. If you were any one of you, if you were recently laid off from a big tech company and had the pseudo luxury of a decent severance package and some time on your hands, had skill sets, knew you wanted to transition into climate, what would you do right now?
So one thing that I've been thinking about, because I've talked to several friends about this, where the challenge is a lot of companies are not hiring right now for full-time employees. However, they have work to be done and are looking for consulting work. So one hack in there is to talk to friends and somehow get into companies to figure out what are some of the problems they have, especially around climate. And then can you construct your own proposal about how you can help them out, and work even on a part-time basis, because what you'll find is there's more flexibility in that budget than there is in potentially bringing on a new headcount, because people make hiring freezes versus saying, well, we don't have project freezes. We still need to work on projects.
Yeah, we're seeing that trend a lot. We have a bunch of fractional CMOs and fractional BD people in our portfolio where people are in between, they're trying before they buy, and it's great for everybody. For that fractional person, they have a portfolio of 3 to 4 companies that they're working with, and it could be one, they're like, you know what, this is my winner and I want to join this full time. And Raj is totally right that these companies still have their OKRs and goals to achieve, and they just can't really bring someone on full time. And, at various different stages, they have different capacities to bring somebody on. The other sort of macro thing going on, which you should all be excited about, is that something like a quarter of all new funding is going towards these climate friendly companies. And so that's great. We're seeing a lot of capital going into these companies that are going to have longer runways. And so that gets me very excited about the potential. Last year, even our 2 strongest portfolio companies that were up rounds were also in climate. And they were just very focused, eyes on the prize, strong businesses. They could communicate to their customers, and they're making a really big positive impact. So, so be bullish in this category, because I think it's going to survive this current economic climate.
Yeah. So on that note, Katie, given that you are a generalist investor, you see companies across the board, all sorts of different industries and sectors. One question that I've seen come up a couple times here in the Q&A is, frankly, it's the elephant in the room question. Historically, working in climate hasn't been something that has been able to pay salaries that are equivalent to other salaries you can get elsewhere. Is that still true? Or do you see your climate tech portfolio companies paying lower or paying different salaries relative to other companies at the same stage as them?
They're paying the same, I think. And there's not a premium. I mean, they're still early stage companies. They better not be paying anyone too much because they haven't proven anything yet, at least for the early stage companies. So there's not that. But also at the end of the day, like, what do you want to work on? What are you going to tell your children? Are you going to tell them that you made click through on ads better, that you were able to deliver more videos on some social product that made people sad at the end of the day? Or were you part of a solution to help advance humanity? So, it's pay and it's also purpose. And I do believe that both can coexist. So don't be so fearful that, obviously you have to pay your bills, but you will get paid. You just maybe not paid as much as you were at Google, but who cares?
And that'll be about stage rather than about market. Right.
Yeah.
100%.
So Christian, you're saying, like, stage wise, climate tech companies are, their compensation packages are going to be similar to other companies at their stage, whether they're in climate or not. There aren't very many Google stage climate tech companies these days out there. Maybe Tesla, right, would be like the example. But relatively speaking, from a from a stage to stage perspective, whether you're in climate or not, doesn't really matter if you're in tech, right? Like obviously NGO world, et cetera, is a totally different conversation.
Yeah, in tech, I mean, I know a whole lot of climate founders and talk to them about all sorts of things, including, how do you approach kind of offers and comp for the company? And everyone's approaching it like any startup, right? Where it is like, hey, the business potential here is huge. As the business is working, we're trying to attract top talent in competition with any other startup out there, same level of need. And the comp's going to reflect stage, where for early stage companies, the thing to really be demanding on is the equity side of that offer, right? That's the payoff of joining a startup rather than a Google. And that's the place where I think for smaller climate tech companies, you're totally right that most of them are. That's the place that the offer should seem really, really strong.
Raj, anything to add? Oh, you're muted, Raj.
Oh, you mean?
Here we go. Yeah. So the financial opportunity at a super high level, I think there's going to be more spent on decarbonization than there was in digitization overall. We're talking over 100 trillion to get to the 2050 net zero goal. And when you look at some studies, like BCG did a study that said that almost 40% of what we need in emissions reduction by 2050 doesn't even exist today. And to get there with that other 60%, it's not moving at a fast enough rate. So when you take the innovation economy has to fill that gap, and there's a big spend on it that's coming. To me, that's just going to translate in. There should be no reason that even over the next 5 to 10 years, we should see some sort of reduction in salaries specific to this sector. In fact, it should be the opposite.
All right, we are approaching the end of this first session. I want to thank the three of you for joining. I want to thank everyone in the audience for tuning in and asking great questions. I do want to say the next session will be starting immediately after this. You can go back to climatecareerweek.org. Do I have that URL right? I think I do. Yes, climatecareerweek.org. And there'll be a link there where you can join the next session through, again, the YouTube channel or the Zoom. Final remarks from any one of the three of you, or let's hear from each of you quickly. Two things. One, you can pick. If you've seen anyone that you really admire, who you believe has transitioned into climate in a really interesting and inspiring way, tell their story very briefly. And if not, or regardless of that, also just any final remarks you have, predictions, advice for folks who are listening. Katie.
Do it. That's it. Just do it.
Awesome. Christian?
It is, any new thing is hard, and the climate transition is new for the global economy, and working in it might be new for many of the people on this Zoom, and hard things have really, really high payoff, right? Do the hard thing.
Raj?
Yeah, I would say that each of you in the audience has some specific skill sets, some comparative advantage that you've utilized in your career. And I would be shocked if it's not applicable in climate. It's just a matter of repositioning it, repackaging it, and then using these resources that the panelists have talked about that are unprecedented, like Climate Draft, and like all the other resources that are out there, so that you can wedge yourself in. This is, I think, huge wind at our backs right now, and take advantage of this, not just for financial sake, but for humanity's sake.
The last thing I'll leave all of you with is everyone on this call right now, the globe may be late to moving to decarbonization, but you're all early in the transition of everyone waking up and realizing it needs to happen urgently. So all of you deciding now's the time, I'm ready to shift my career, you're on the front end of a tidal wave of people who are going to make the same choice as you over the next few years. Jump in head first, take advantage of it. And I'm glad you're all here, and the climate space welcomes you with open arms. So thanks so much for joining us today. Katie, Christian, Raj, thank you. Everyone, please go to climatecareerweek.org and find the next set of activities that you plan to jump into as you make your transition.
Thank you so much.
Everyone.